Charlie. He'll grab a seat next to me. But you haven't met yet John Sanders. John, go ahead and work your way up here as well. John is a church planter and lead pastor of Rescue Church. He's the founder of Small Town Big Jesus Resources. Got a podcast to encourage small town pastors. Now, some of you are like, I didn't know there was a podcast to encourage small town pastors. Well, that's one of the things we're going to remedy. And one of the ways we're going to remedy that is when you Google small town ministry, a rural ministry, you're going to find that the Rural Church Matters, Rural Matters Institute will be the first thing that pops up, and it'll link to all these different resources that are actually out here. So again, that gives us the opportunity to use some of the web space for significant work. And we're going to talk about church planting. Now we've talked about different topics, right? You've seen, we talked about vocational ministry, now we're talking church planting. Now I recognize that not all of you are into church planting, or for that matter, bivocational, or a little later on, we're going to talk about multi-site. But we're trying to set a broad table because we're going to need all kinds of methods to reach into rural North America. And so we're thankful, for example, the folks from Village Missions are here. They're going into established churches and have a strategy for missionaries to go there. Thanking God for so many wonderful strategies. But I want to talk about church planting. Okay, now we've heard a little about Charlie's story. I want you to tell me a little bit about your story and background, and then we'll start our dialogue. Jump in.
All right, so I grew up in the ministry. My dad was a pastor, and I moved from Peoria, Illinois. I was a firefighter there for the city of Peoria. Really felt God calling me into ministry. Ran from that calling for quite a while, and when I finally surrendered, I said, "Where do you want me?" I figured it'd be somewhere with beaches and palm trees. He said, "South Dakota." So in 2004, we moved to South Dakota. My wife and I and family, we planted what has now become the Rescue Church. We're non-denominational. I come from a Baptist background. We're an independent, non-denominational church. Currently, we have 5 campuses in rural communities, and just seeing God do awesome stuff.
And that's kind of an unusual thing to hear, 5 campuses in rural communities. Bible college, seminary background at all?
None. Just ministry, School of Hard Knocks.
I love it. I love it. All right, so you go there, you plant this church, and then you end up with this field of churches. Now again, Charlie, your strategy is a little different. You don't have multi-site. You're there in Oil City, getting it done, planting single-site church, correct? Yep. Okay. Tell us a little bit about the journey thus far. You mainly gave us more vision and encouraged us. Tell us what's going on.
Sure. So, yeah.
Give it a second. Keep talking.
Check. Okay. So it's been kind of a lot of a process. You know, we started off we were completely bivocational, or not even bivocational. I mean, the church wasn't doing anything as far as salary. And
technically it's not bivocational if you don't have another job. So it's just sort of
so monovocational.
Monovocational.
Yeah.
With no money.
So we basically went in with this idea. We wanted to be no hype, grassroots, word of mouth. We felt like that was the culture that rural America was calling for. That was what felt natural to us, and that's what we tried to do.
Now, I've been to Oil City, which a lot of people probably haven't been. I planted a church in Erie, Pennsylvania, a couple of churches, and we'd go down there, and it's kind of a cool place. But give us a little more context. We know far past the economic boom. I mean, this was the place when, there's a reason it's called Quaker State. That's Pennsylvania's the Quaker State, right? So how many people live there now, and how many people are kind of within the range that you're trying to reach of your community?
Yeah, so it's the biggest town within about an hour. 10,000 people live there right now, and we basically have a 2-county range. The Venango County has about 58,000 people, and Clarion County has 40,000 people, so neither are very large. But those, when I think of home, it's those 2 counties. I grew up right on the line.
And how long have you been there now?
We moved there about a year and almost a half ago to plant this church, but then we had spent 20-something years there, and I had been in ministry as an associate pastor before that.
And so tell me, thus far, you've started services. How's that going? Tell me your attendance, those kinds of things.
Yeah, so one of the things that you hear about when you're church planting is, you got to have like 4 small groups before you have a Sunday morning service. What we found is actually in Western PA, the corner we're in is very traditional. You had to have a Sunday service or you were a cult. And so we started with the Sunday service. We started with 8 people in our house, and then when we grew to 16, we found that big room, and then right now, last week, we had our biggest week ever. 116 people came out.
That's great. That's super exciting. There you go. And that's super encouraging. All right. So you had mentioned, just over there, you had read my book on church planting and some other books on church planting. What was missed in books that weren't written by rural people?
I think, the the anti-hype thing is, I think, huge. Like, the big launches, I haven't found them to be super successful.
And just so we're clear, he's graciously not saying this. I have a whole chapter on doing the big launch. So that was like, no, not so much going to work in this context.
Right. Word of mouth. We did almost no advertising. We just let people tell people, and it was amazing in our community. And so, yeah, word of mouth was huge for us. So I think that, and just the fact that numbers don't correlate. You know, when we read about these churches growing fast in big places, well, we can't expect that. It's not the same.
Good. What else? What would you say was left out of some of the things you've seen and heard about church planting when you went rural?
Well, I think it's just, it doesn't get included in the conversation, and it's a completely different animal. It's a completely different culture. To celebrate the strengths of a small town and to leverage that for church planting, there's definite challenges that are unique to small town, but there's also strengths. So I think when you just read the average church books on church planting, you get kind of the common wisdom of what works in a big metroplex, and not all of that translates into rural. So I think
we need a volume.
Yeah.
We're going to do a volume, so we know we need a volume to talk about some of those things. But as you kind of learned along the way, what things did you come in, for both of you, what things did you come in thinking and expecting that didn't turn out to be the way you thought and expected? Can you think of any things like that kind of were surprising to you?
One of the things I was surprised about was that people in poor communities are still generous and really willing to give. And so our church by May was able to give us enough to make it, and then I would work some other odd jobs on the side, but the money was there. Even in a very poor place, God provided.
What else?
Well, one thing I would say is I connected with that RHMA. We talked about that earlier before I went to the small town South Dakota.
RMHA is RHMA is Rural Home Missionary Association. Ron Klassen couldn't be here. Does give his greetings. He's involved in what we're doing here, and I'll be speaking at their national conference this year. So, but they train in these spaces. So you were involved with them.
Yeah.
How?
So I kind of had an idea going in of, okay, it's different context, but one thing I think is that misconception that small town people are just slow to change. They won't embrace new ideas. I found that not to be the case. I think with strong leadership and a God-given vision, people will follow and they'll accept change. They'll go with it. So don't be afraid of that. I think sometimes this thing about, you got to go slow. I mean, there's times that's wisdom and you should, but man, have a God-given vision, lead with some authority, and watch people embrace that.
Yeah, tell me about how you're doing that with multi-site in particular. That's a newer idea in the rural area. It's primarily been large suburban and urban churches. Tell us what's working.
Well, in 2009, we'd been going for about 5 years and had hit all the goals that I thought would take a lifetime to accomplish. So I was in a season of prayer and fasting, asking God, what does that next level look like? And in the summer of 2009, He just gave me these very clear snapshots in my brain of multi-site. But I didn't even know that was a thing. I hadn't heard the term. And so in 2009, I started to really search that out. Like I sensed God saying, through the use of technology, I want to multiply this church. I'll tell you, I'll point at Shannon Odell. In 2010, someone connected me with his book, Transforming Church in Rural America. Obviously, but then I kind of learned the term multi-site. But as I'm reading his story, I'm like, this is kind of exact. Someone's already doing this, And so it wasn't like we didn't hear about multi-site and go, that sounds sexy, I want to look into the camera and welcome all our campuses. It wasn't like that. It was clearly God just saying, I want to use a new, innovative way to reach, because we can't, if we go the traditional church planting model, where we hire a seminary-trained pastor and send him to a town of 600 people and hire staff and build a building, we'd still be at one location right now. Multi-site has allowed us to get a church into some communities that we would not have been able to.
Video venue multi-site?
Yes, and then about a year and a half, we moved to where I'm letting my campus pastors, if they're gifted to preach, and if a few others confirm that other than just themselves, if they can really preach, we'll let them preach.
We've met some of them. So
yeah, they're out there.
We understand. Nothing terribly wrong with that. So you use phrases like new and innovative, and one of the things sometimes we hear cautions from even other speakers is that maybe new and innovative is not the thing that's going to grasp the attention of the rural context. So how do you explain that? Is there a percentage of people who are more open than that and some are not? How do you explain it?
I'll tell you what, I'm going home and preaching about six-man football because it's the difference.
That was so awesome. I think that's going to be the defining thing in our meeting is
it's the difference of a church or no church in some cases. Like, it's an innovation out of necessity.
Okay. So explain to what it looks like. So I know you got the main, and I ask numbers because I want to get a context of what they're doing, we're not all strutting around talking about our church numbers. So your main campus was at what, attendance-wise?
About 7,000. No,
okay.
totally joking.
Yeah, okay. Wow, I was going to say. I wasn't expecting
When
that.
I cast the vision for multi-site, we were running 60 people.
Okay,
in
so
our
this is
original
not,
location.
hundreds of people. So this is 60 people. And so now, what's the, I probably don't call it the main site, but what's the broadcast site attendance now?
We're at about 100 on a good
Okay,
Sunday.
so still not, I mean, that's
Yeah.
probably surprising a lot of you. Here's a multi-site church, 100 people on a Sunday. So how do you work it? Give me a town where it is, how far away it is, what's the technology, give us all that.
Our first campus we launched in 2012, 20 miles away in a little town of Coleman, South Dakota, 600 people. Originally, we started with a live video feed. It was really high tech. I mean, we timed our services to go live, and it was really cool using the internet just to stream it. We got into some trouble with where our internet stopped working well. The gerbil quit spinning the wheel or whatever makes that happen out there. But so I resisted it, but now we do a pre-recorded service or a sermon where on Tuesday or Wednesday of the week we'll get together with our video team and record this Sunday's sermon, and that's what the campuses get for our video venue.
And what sizes are the campuses? You don't have to give them all, just give me in general.
Man, they're running anywhere from 45 to 100 is our biggest,
And
campus.
and who's there? Campus pastors?
Yep.
And what are they? They can't be full-time with that many
No.
people, so what are the campus pastors doing?
Well, they're all bivocational, and even myself, I went back to the fire service in 2015. I worked for Sioux Falls Fire Rescue. That wasn't out of necessity, it was just because I wanted to I did the bus driving thing for 11 years. Oh yeah, it's our routes pay more than the field trips, by the way. But anyway, that's a great way to get.
You need to renegotiate the contract over there, I think.
Yeah,
is what
all
it
of our
is.
guys are bivocational, except our guy down in Jamaica. We can pay him a full-time salary, but it would be a part-time salary here.
Fascinating. Okay, talk to me a little bit, Charlie. So you mentioned you don't have Bible college or seminary. Do you have any education past high school? Did you do anything?
Yeah, I got a degree in fire science.
Okay, fire
Fight
science, which hence you're doing firefighting thing. Okay, but the reason I ask is you come into a community where there may not be an educational differential. You come into a community with a PhD from. Did you go to University of Virginia, Charlottesville? Okay, what does that look like? Because a lot of times pastors come out with a seminary degree into a community where there's not been as much graduate work or even college work. How does that work for you?
Well, like they aren't going to think about a sabbatical very quick, I'll tell you that. But you know what? My feeling is, I always have felt kind of like these are my people, and I'm one of them, and I bring academic stuff when I can, but I always try to speak to everyone.
Is that reciprocated? You say, these are my people. And by the way, we're not making any assumption that rural people are less educated in general. There may be different, but you got a PhD, so you're more educated than the vast majority of people in a context where, as you know, we talked about this a little while, there's a brain drain that's often there. So how do they accept you in that way as well?
Yeah, my experience has been that they do, and I think humility and authenticity that we talked about before, just be who you are. Everyone has different skills, and I bring what I have, and they bring what they have, and it's great.
And this is part of who you are. You grew up there. You on your website, you mentioned you grew up near there, and then you lived in Oil City. You make the point of saying you lived in Oil City. So coming home as a son of that community, does that good, bad? How does that help for you or hurt for you?
I'm like the cousin, because I went to school there, but I didn't live in Oil City growing up, and so I have a lot of friends from elementary school and grade school that we're now reconnecting with. People know who I am, but it's not like I actually lived there. But I will say that reputation matters, and if you grew up and you love God, that can be a huge asset to go home, actually. And people will say, I've seen your life for 20, 30 years. So it can be good.
So last question for you, and then we'll have both of you here. What advice would you give? Because remember, this will be watched by a lot of people watching rural church planting. So what advice would you give to rural church planters on what they might want to know or what they might want to do? I want you to do a favor. I want you to look at them. I want you to look at that camera in the middle. They're going to put it right there. And I want you to talk to the church planters who are watching this. And I'm going to ask you to do the same. Go ahead.
My advice would be to love God, love people, and get out on the sidewalks. We don't need to be in our offices very much. Some of the best advice I ever heard, I was at Regent College in Vancouver doing some research. One of Eugene Peterson's students came up and did a chapel service, and he told about a time that Peterson had heard him preach. And after the sermon, Peterson said, he said to his teacher, Peterson, what'd you think? And Peterson said, that was a good sermon, a little too good. I don't think you were out in your parish enough. And I have taken that to heart as a rural pastor.
I love dropping a little Eugene Peterson wisdom. Look there, give
That's
some
good.
advice.
I will just give you the message, and this is going to sound like a plug for my podcast.
I'll give you
but
the
it's-
message. Was that a
it's-
pun?
It's going to, yes.
Eugene Peterson,
No,
the message.
The
Okay.
message. That's
Did you
good.
see what I did there? Okay, sorry.
Check
sorry.
this out.
Sorry, focus.
This is the message of my podcast, and this is going to sound like a shameless plug, but it's more of an invitation. Here's the encouragement I want to give to small town pastors. I want to challenge small town pastors to really believe that you are not in the penalty box. You are exactly where God wants to do something big in your small town. I believe that. So here's the invitation. This Small Town Big Church podcast that I do, I want to share your story. If you're serving somewhere in a small town, I want to tell your story. I want to get that out there because you think you're serving all alone in Oil City, Pennsylvania. God is raising up some leaders in rural America and rural North America. I want to share your story, and I want you to believe for a big story because He wants to do, He's not turned off by the population sign on the edge of your community. Like He loves every one of those 300 people, and He wants to do something big and significant in your town. So let's
Do this. Take your mic.
I'm not going to do that. These are expensive. We can't afford these, so I'm not dropping this.
Hey, you guys stay right here for just a second, but let's thank them if you don't mind.